So you've worked on over 1,100 miles of tunneling and trenchless technology projects. What types of projects do you find most exciting, and what makes those stand out from a technical or even a leadership perspective?
Projects are different depending on the clients, depending on the use, depending on the country. But I guess I prefer just the very simple, basic approach of, let's try to figure out, why is this project being conceived? Why is it wanting to be built? And then I really enjoy trying to help things like clean up rivers, streams, things like that. So that's kind of.
Did you know that over 1,100 miles of underground pipeline hide some of the most complex and exciting engineering projects in the world? In this episode, we're joined by Everett Litton, PE, Vice President at WSP in the U.S., to explore what drives large-scale tunneling projects across North America and beyond. We'll dive into what makes these underground endeavors so unique, how Everett's early influences and career path shaped his leadership today, and why giving back through mentoring and outreach is a cornerstone of his work. Whether you're managing projects, mentoring future engineers, or considering your own path in civil engineering, this episode is packed with insights to help you dig deeper and lead smarter. I'm your host, James Taylor, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast, the industry's leading show for civil engineering professionals, ranked as the #1 civil engineering podcast by FeedSpot. Before we jump in, I wanted to tell you about our AEC PM Connect event, an interactive experience where civil engineers can sharpen their project management skills through real-world sessions on topics like earned value, AI and project management, and also risk management. Visit aecpmconnect.com and register today. We currently have events in Kansas City and New Jersey, with more coming. It's now time for our civil engineering conversation of the week with Everett Litton, PE, Vice President at WSP in the U.S. Everett, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Everett, can you start by briefly introducing yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, and also share about your current role at WSP?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, though, I'm a dad to 3 and I'm a husband to 1. But yes, I'm a vice president within WSP's St. Louis office. I help our geotech and tunneling national business line lead quite a few different projects across the country, as well as some international things on occasion. I manage our St. Louis office and then also any sort of trenchless projects that come across the United States. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and happy to be talking about it.
I like how you started out with, first and foremost, it's my family. A lot of times I think in the engineering world, we think about the accomplishments that we've had in the technology, but behind everything, it's our family behind us.
It is. And luckily today they're off for the summer, so it makes it a little less stressful for dad.
Exactly. Can you tell me a little bit about what first inspired you to pursue a career in engineering, especially in the underground construction field, and anything in particular that really helped you shape your decision?
Yeah, a few different things. So first, I'll start just to how I got into engineering a little bit more so. So when I was a kid, I grew up on about 20 acres of property, mostly wooded, had a small creek that rolled through it. And so I spent a lot of time as a kid just playing outside, making little small dams and things on that creek, building different trails and forts and things like that in the woods. So I think part of that, as well as working commercial construction once I was a teenager and working alongside electricians and carpenters. And my father was a painter. So working, construction and then also working or sort of playing, I guess, in nature really kind of led me towards engineering. I was always decently talented in math and science in particular. And then moving on specifically to the underground construction question, I took a summer internship, I believe it was in 2007 in Kansas City. And really that was my first experience in really working underground. We were working on in a mountain range in Las Vegas between Henderson and Lake Mead. So getting to do rock core drilling and things like that for some tunneling projects is really kind of what hooked me. And so that's really kind of what got me introduced into that particular industry. I was pretty amenable to go almost any direction, I would say, and until that point. But that's really kind of what got me into that particular space. and I haven't looked back since.
What was it at that point in time that really drove you to that?
I mean, I think it was just growing up humble, growing up wanting to kind of live and work in a professional community. I had gotten a couple internships before that point, but I think that was kind of the one that best fit what I really wanted to do with my career and my life a little bit. And so I think that's really kind of what helped connect the dots for me is just I could see myself fitting into that particular kind of culture, and it's really quite inviting culture, in my opinion. It's fairly small, fairly niche within the
Yeah.
broader sort of civil engineering community. And I also really enjoyed that it still had some art to it. It really was not as code driven once you took construction and things like that underground, and it intrigued me.
So you've worked on over 1,100 miles of tunneling and trenchless technology projects. What types of projects do you find most exciting, and what makes those stand out from a technical or even a leadership perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, projects are different depending on the clients, depending on the use, depending on the country. Politics and things like that sometimes get involved. But I guess I prefer just the very simple, basic approach of, let's try to figure out why is this project being conceived? Why is it wanting to be built by the owner or whatever? And then I really enjoy trying to help things like clean up rivers, streams, things like that. So that's kind of why those are the projects that I particularly enjoy, and really just going to those fundamental basics of trying to help improve our planet, improve the things that we do on an everyday basis. That's what excites me. It does change a lot internationally. Projects are ran quite differently. Some of my work with EWB in Bolivia and Nicaragua, kind of lets you see some of that at a much different sort of level than a professional level. As those projects, I think, are really a key highlight to, just very basic human needs and trying to help provide those. And so I try to just think of it in those sort of terms, try to, give back. Any project that I put out, I really want to make sure we minimize our impact on the environment, on this, earth. And then all the secondary nuances come kind of second to me. It's really about trying to improve lives for people somewhere along the way.
Can you talk a little bit about the international stuff you mentioned? More, human driven. It's a need, right? It needs to happen. Can you talk a little bit about some of those projects and what you've discovered from them?
Yeah, sure. So I traveled to Bolivia. I believe it was about 2013 or so after moving back. I grew up in Missouri. I moved to Washington, D.C. for a while. And then I moved back to St. Louis. And then I volunteered with Engineers Without Borders, eventually became responsible engineer in charge for sort of a combined professional and student trip to Bolivia. And at that point in time, we were helping them build out a sanitary system for their community high up in the Andes Mountains, about an hour north of La Paz, Bolivia.
Okay. Yeah.
So really just kind of, and that was also in conjunction with a nonprofit in Bolivia called Engineers in Action. So really just getting to help, be involved in some of that, seeing our local chapter and the St. Louis University chapter at that time continue to grow and aspire to do good things, really helped me give back to the world in other ways, especially for a disadvantaged community that really, frankly, needed the help. And then eventually we were able to help. I actually, that first trip was for drinking water, and then eventually we moved on to helping them with their sanitation system as well. But we basically canvassed the area. It's a very remote area.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of springs and things. And so we sampled water quality samples from those springs, tested those springs for coliforms, and then eventually designed and helped implement a basically gravity distribution system to help bring taps to individual homeowners in the community, which is about roughly 150 people or so.
That's awesome. I mean, anytime as engineers we're able to give back, yeah, I know it probably means a little bit extra. The work we do and locally is awesome, but anytime you're able to make an impact on those people internationally that don't have those things that are common for most of us here in the U.S., it really kind of allows you to put the world into perspective.
Yeah, it's amazing how different it is, especially once you go to different countries and things like that. And, most of the professional work that we do is in, the first or second world, but, really these third world countries need help too, and in all reality, they need help more than United States and other countries. So yeah, and then we tried to do another project in Nicaragua, but there was some hurdles to that one as well that I was involved with. But yeah, any chance I can get to help, people, the planet, the fish that I enjoy catching when I go fly fishing, those sorts of things are what I enjoy.
So, having experience in both North America, internationally, leading projects, leading teams, how do you approach managing complex underground construction efforts that involve varying teams, geologies, and regulations?
So I'll kind of go back to that last question. It's really just the why. Why is this project trying to be built? And start with the very technical basics. What and focus on those things. They do change pretty dramatically by client, by project, by country. The needs of a particular project and the amount of detailed design that goes into something, or even construction for that matter, it is different, is different. The different clients want different things, but I like to try to start just with the very fundamental, like, why are we trying to do this project? And that's pretty universal. It really doesn't change drastically. And if you kind of, if that's your north or your true north, that helps you keep on track even when there's noise and confusion from project or from varying different things that we all deal with on a very regular basis. I mean, every day there are hurdles that we all have to overcome, and but if having that real true north defined is what you're trying to really achieve to help humanity, that's I think what I like to focus on as much as possible.
I know for myself, going up from a young engineer to a project manager, senior project manager, one of the things I really tried to make sure that I kept in the forefront of my head is to always explain the why behind the what. A lot of times we are so focused on the solution that we don't think about why the solution is needed, or why this is going to be impactful at the end of the day. And when you shine that light on the why, it really allows everything else to come into focus. And it sounds like for yourself you're finding it the same way. Even on the most complex underground projects, it doesn't matter as long as you kind of define that why.
Yeah, and there's a lot of nitty-gritty details in the what, and that's all important as
Yeah.
well. But yeah, I 100% agree. And that's how you should at least try to start a project. Sometimes you do have to veer off into the what at some point for sure. But I feel like if I start it in that with that mindset, it helps me cross borders and different geopolitical type geologies, different things like that. It doesn't really matter as much if you really understand the why.
Now, you've been active with the Underground Construction Association for over a decade now, and you're leading the Down for That initiative. Can you talk a little bit about what that for That initiative is, what the impacts you're seeing from this outreach, and why this work is important to you?
Absolutely. I enjoy it quite a lot. I took it over from a gentleman named Paul Schmall out in New York, who helped kind of start things back in about 5 or 6 years ago. And I've been leading it since then. But it's basically our way of trying to give back, when I say our, I mean Underground Construction Association's way of trying to give back to students, trying to bring students into the industry. As most industries are today, recruitment is challenging. It's difficult, and so we need help to do some of the things we're wanting to do as an organization. So we reach out to about 180 universities in the United States, a few outside of the United States, particularly in Canada as well. And we've really tried to help diversify the sort of recruitment pool that the industry is pulling from. But we also try to give students opportunities to see some of our major conferences, to get underground, to see construction, and to bring professionals to those universities to talk more about this area of engineering that not everyone knows about.
Yeah, I was gonna say you mentioned at the very beginning like how niche of a area in civil engineering this is. Bringing up the aspect of not having enough people to work on infrastructure projects to work in the civil engineering industry. Do you find it even more difficult because of how niche the underground world is?
I actually don't find it that
Okay.
difficult. I find it very difficult to get students exposed to our very niche community. But once they are exposed and once they are, really understand what they're doing, I actually find it very easy to keep them. So retention is very important, especially once they get into the industry, and that's always something we need to focus on as well. But no, actually, it's a very warm and embracing niche community. And that's actually what I love about it. Both, on the professional sort of engineering firm side or construction side of things, as well as within the overall organization. People are very warm and embracing to especially young professionals, in my general opinion. And so, no, I think it's actually quite easy to get them integrated. But, getting them that first exposure to a tunnel, to a deep underground excavation, to things like that, that's usually more of our struggle, is just because a lot of students go to school, they learn about a very broad spectrum of engineering. And so there's not a lot of exposure except for some particular universities to this particular field. So that's what we focus on. We try to get them that exposure. That's really what Down for That's about.
How has your involvement in organizations like UCA and NASTT contributed to your professional growth? And what would you say to younger engineers about the value of getting involved in industry groups?
I think it's immensely helpful. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today without organizations like that. And there's been many other organizations along the way. Engineers Without Borders, like I talked about earlier, Engineers Club of St. Louis had helped me get engaged at a very local level. And then obviously UCA and NASTT, which you had mentioned, I wouldn't be anywhere close to where I am today in my career without that engagement. And then oftentimes you end up making lasting bonds that end up spanning, regardless of where people end up going, whether it's competitors, on, say the construction side of things, on owner side of things, those relationships really pay off in the long run. And sometimes it's hard to see that, I think, as a young professional. And
Right.
but they do. And I there's enough people, I've had enough mentors along the way, that have helped guide me in those directions, and I'm appreciative for it. And I'm appreciative, especially to those organizations, because most of the time they're nonprofit, most of the time they're managed on tight budgets, and it's hard. It's a hard life, but those organizations, they give back a lot to our profession, and I'm grateful, and I highly encourage young professionals to get involved. Just start with one, and just have fun with it. Try to go to one that you enjoy, and then grow from there. And you can try to be strategic about it, or not. It's all very helpful to your career.
Yeah, it's one of the best pieces of advice that I've heard is first off choosing one, right? Like there's a bajillion out there that you could be a part of. You got to find the
And
one
they're all very
that you,
good.
yeah, they are, and but you got to find the one that interests you the most and the one that you can get involved in. Don't just be someone that just is a passive attendee. Get in, join and get involved because that's really how you do see your growth kind of going forward. You come out of school, right, and you have the very technical pieces of things, but you need that next step, and your employer is going to give you some of that, but you need to build that relationship with people outside of work to kind of, you know, see what's going on, understand the industry, what are the things that are upcoming, but also to just continue to grow yourself. And it sounds like that's what's been really impactful to you, has been your professional growth through that all.
Absolutely, and those initial conversations are awkward, and they're
Yes,
they really are. There's no good way
we're all
around it.
engineers, right?
Yeah,
We're all
absolutely.
we're all awkward in them anyway, right? Exactly.
But the reason part of the reason it's awkward is because people are scared to have those conversations. But then also, the really there's a lot of people that work together that get involved in those committees. And like you're saying, don't just join an organization, be actually involved in an organization. That's how you really start to know people. That's how you get past that awkwardness. And it takes time. It takes years in some cases to get past that. But eventually you become known, and that starts to ease with time for sure.
What's one final piece of advice you'd like to share with civil engineers looking to grow as leaders in technical or project based roles?
I would say just be humble, but also try to be bold where you can be, and just have fun. Try to find something that you enjoy, and connect those dots to something you have fun. And if you're not having fun with it, maybe you should try to pivot slightly. I'm not saying totally, but if you're not having fun on a day-to-day basis, it can be a long career. But just try to find something you enjoy and really put your all into it. And that's really my advice. I do mentor quite a few young professionals, and try to get a mentor if you don't already have one, or multiple for that matter.
Can you talk a little bit about the bold piece? Because I think that's one where, you mentioned humble, which is great. Like, hey, you're coming out of school, you know, understand that you don't know everything. Like, be humble. Like, go through it. But talk a little bit about the bold piece. I'm curious where you see that coming into play.
To me, it's part of the have fun
Okay.
aspect of things. I think that this is a very this profession, engineering as a whole, is very white collar, is somewhat old school in some respects. And I see that changing. I slowly, it's through the course of my 18 years. I would say that people were very hesitant to do that when I was starting, or at least I was. But if you have a good idea, speak up. I'm saying be respectful. I'm saying be kind, all those sorts of things. But if you have a good idea, speak up. And that, I guess that's what I mean by being
I
bold,
love it.
is just because you're young doesn't mean you don't have a good idea. Now it
Right.
has to be tempered at times, and you have to carefully roll things out. But there are ways of still trying to be bold, and still doing that, either through organizations, or your own individual firms, or construction companies. But I encourage us, I think Silicon Valley and other industries that are peripheral to what we do probably do better at that than
Hmm.
we do as a profession. But so, we need to break that mold in some respects.
Very interesting thoughts, Everett. Really appreciate what you've been sharing with us today. All right, now it's time for our CE Hot Seat segment of the week with Everett Litton. Everett, welcome to the CE Hot Seat. You ready to go?
Totally. Let's go, James.
All right. Do you have any specific rituals that you practice every day? For example, a specific morning ritual or lunchtime ritual, things that you do on a daily basis that contribute to you being a successful professional.
I do actually. So one of them, well, actually, I have two. So the first one is I like to go for walks. I work in downtown St. Louis. I've moved around in my career a little bit, but I like to step away from my office on a pretty regular basis. I like to break up the day, and really just go exploring, and just give my mind a little mental break in the middle of the day for lunchtime on occasion. And then the second one is I kind of combine a little bit of like stretching and what I'll call meditation. This is probably learned through yoga with my wife, but I like to do some sort of stretching and meditation early in the morning, and it helps me kind of conquer my to-do list early throughout the day before I fully lose steam. And then I actually don't really like to stay in the office for a full 8 hours. I like to take a couple hours off in the afternoon, go either work out or take my little boy fishing or something like that, and then make up those 2 hours later on in the day. So I think just having a sort of non-traditional work day, I think is really part of my routine. But I encourage anyone to do those sorts of things.
What's one book that you recommend to engineers regularly, or just one book that you've found to be extremely helpful in your professional and or your personal development?
I have a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts and also audiobooks. But I guess the first one that really kind of got me into what I'll call kind of the self-help sort of scene was probably Stephen Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And then sort of, which is a bit dated, but still very, very good. And then also anything by Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, Malcolm Gladwell, including some of their podcasts, I very much enjoy as well.
Thinking back on your managers of the past, picture your favorite manager or even managers. What was it that made them your favorite?
I liked that they communicated. I like that they communicated very openly, very honestly. I actually enjoy criticism. I think too many managers in this profession don't give valid criticism to professionals, and especially young professionals, I think need that to really help guide their career. But yeah, I think if you can never communicate too much to engineers, in my general opinion, especially young professionals, they want to know about strategy. They want to know how do you win work? How do you execute work? How do you run the business? Those sorts of things are what uh, the next generation, I think, really strives to understand. And some within the industry are hesitant to provide that information. And I I encourage just open communication about all things business, and I think it breeds a healthier work culture.
I've got one final question, and that is the critical civil engineering career elevator advice question. So, if you got into an elevator with a civil engineering student and had, let's say, around 30 to 40 seconds with them, what career advice would you share with them?
I would say just, work hard, be humble, be kind, and just put your head down, and opportunities will come your way. Nothing beats good hard work. And if you're not willing to do that, it's going to be very difficult for you in your career.
Everett, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can our listeners connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to follow me. But I enjoy new connections and would love to connect with others. And thank you for the time today, James.
Absolutely. We appreciate it and looking forward to following your career and hearing more from you in the future.
All right, thank you.
Please remember you can find the show notes for this episode at civilengineeringpodcast.com. There you'll find the summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all your civil engineering endeavors.